They called it the Hollow Vault, and by the time I got there, it had already chewed through three of the Empire's best engineers. I want to say that up front, because nobody believes a janitor when he tells this story sober. I was 61, mopping floors on a mining station built into the crust of a dead moon, and the only thing special about me was 31 years in a Navy that doesn't exist anymore, on hulls that don't exist anymore, listening to machines that wanted to die. The vault itself was older than anybody's empire. The miners had cut down through 6 kilometers of rock looking for rare ore and broken into a chamber that wasn't supposed to be there, a buried structure, pre-everything, built around a core that hummed at a frequency that made your back teeth ache if you stood near it too long. Whoever built it was gone. What they left behind was still running, and it had started running wrong. 3 engineers came in, one after another, over 2 weeks. Sharp, good degrees, the kind of confidence that comes from never once being wrong in a simulation. Each looked at the core, ran diagnostics, told it what to do. Each left on a transport a few days later, pale, not talking much. The wine kept climbing. The station's overseer, a tall, gray-skinned admiral named Tessinar Vol, gave the order to evacuate the lower levels and seal the vault for good. Bury it. Forget it. That's what you do with a problem that won't listen. I've been mopping the corridor outside the vault entrance every night for 3 months by then. Nobody asked my opinion on dying machines. Why would they? I emptied trash and kept the floors so clean you could see the ceiling lights in them, and I went home to my bunk and slept the good, dumb sleep of a man with no decisions to make. But I'd heard that whine before. Not that whine exactly. You don't get the same fingerprint twice, but that family of sound. I spent half my Navy career below the waterline on boats, so old the Navy was embarrassed to admit we still ran them, reactors that had outlived 3 captains and 2 wars, and every single one of them, when it started to go bad, made a sound like that. Like something trying to tell you it was scared. The night before they sealed it, I asked Vol for an hour. He looked at me the way you'd look at a chair that asked you a question. I was wearing my coverall with the mop water stain down one leg, and I had my tool bag, the same canvas roll I carried since I was 22, and an old portable radio I kept in my locker because the silence in that station got to be too much some nights. You, he said, not unkind, just disbelieving. You want an hour with the deepest engineering problem on this station. I want an hour with a tired reactor, I said. That's a different thing than what your engineers had. He let me go because the alternative was sealing the vault anyway and losing nothing by it. I think that's the only reason. Nobody expected anything from me. That part at least made it easy. The chamber was hot and close, and the air had that metal taste deep systems get. The core sat in the center of it, a black column wound with the engineer's diagnostic cable like a man tied down for surgery he didn't ask for. Every readout was red. The wine filled the whole room, and underneath it, if you stood still and let your ears adjust, there was a second note, low or almost a stutter, the sound of something fighting its own rhythm. I did the thing that got me through 31 years of bad reactors. I didn't touch anything for the first 10 minutes. I just stood there and listened the way you'd sit by a hospital bed and let your eyes adjust before you started asking the patient questions. The engineers had been forcing it. I could see it in the cable harness, 3 command protocols layered on top of each other, each telling the core to behave like a machine the engineers understood. None had asked what it actually was. They diagnosed it like a turbine. It wasn't. It was old and tired, and somewhere in its design it had been built to respond to a steady external rhythm, a pacing signal, the kind of thing you'd give a sick heart to help it find its own beat again. The pre-Empire builders must have had some way of feeding it that rhythm. The Empire's engineers had stripped that layer out without knowing it was there, replaced it with brute command, and the core had spent 2 weeks trying to scream around an obstruction nobody could see on a screen. I pulled the command cable, just unplugged it. If you'd seen Vol's face on the monitor outside, you'd have thought I'd just shot the patient. Then I did the only thing I knew how to do, the thing that doesn't show up in any manual, because the manual writers were always too embarrassed to put in writing. I wired my old radio into a spare diagnostic port, set it to broadcast instead of receive, and I started humming. It's an old submariner's trick, half superstition and half real engineering, and nobody who's done it can fully explain which part is which. A tired reactor on an old boat will sometimes settle if you feed it a steady, simple, human rhythm through the right channel. Not a command, just a beat, the kind of thing a frightened thing can follow without being told what to do. We used to hum work songs into the coolant monitors at 3 in the morning when the boat was creaking. My old chief called it talking it down. I never had a better name for it. I hummed the same 6 bars over and over for 40 minutes. An old tune, nothing special, something my mother used to sing over the stove. The wine in the chamber didn't drop right away. It climbed once, sharp enough that I felt it in my fillings, and for a second I thought I'd lose it entirely. I kept humming. I didn't raise my voice or change the rhythm, because a frightened thing doesn't need you frightened too. It needs you steady. It found the beat on its own. That's the part one still can't explain to engineers, and I've stopped trying. The pitch dropped, found something close to my rhythm, and settled into it the way an old engine settles into idle. The red readouts on the wall went amber, one at a time, then a slow scatter of green. I sat down on the floor with my back against the housing, because my knees aren't what they were, and the danger had passed enough that I figured I'd earn a rest. I must have dozed off somewhere in there. 31 years of bad sleep on bad boats will make a man able to sleep anywhere once the noise stops being a threat. Bull found me like that. Asleep against a stabilized core, my radio still humming its 6 bars into the dark, my mop bucket left outside the door where I'd abandoned it 3 hours before. He didn't wake me right away. The crew chief who'd come down with him told me later that Vol just stood there a long while, looking at the readouts, looking at me, like he was trying to work out which of the two impossible things in front of him was harder to believe. When I did wake up, he asked me what I'd done. I told him the truth, that I hadn't done anything clever, that I just stopped fighting a tired old machine and let it find its own way back. He didn't like that answer. People with admiral's bars rarely do. He wanted a procedure he could write down and hand to the next engineer. I didn't have one to give him. Some things you can't put in a manual. You can only do them slow and mean them. He offered me a posting. Command rank, his own words, full engineering authority over the vault, and a say in every decision made about that core from then on. I could see he meant it as the highest thing he had to give, and from a man like Vol, it probably was. I turned it down. Politely, I hope. I told him I'd spent half my life being handed authority over machines smarter than me, and I'd never once needed the rank to do the job right. What I wanted, I said, was my mop closet back and my radio, and to be the one who got called down to that chamber if it ever started humming wrong again. Nobody else. Just me and whatever I happened to be humming that week. He looked at me a long moment, the way you look at something you've decided not to argue with. Then he said the thing I think about more than I let on, that in 3 months of running that station, I was the first person he'd watch do a job without once needing him to be impressed by it. I told him that was probably the nicest thing anybody'd said to me in 20 years and went back to mopping. The core is still down there, last I heard, steady as an old man's pulse. Some nights, when the corridor is quiet and the lights are low, I still go down and sit with it a while. I don't always hum. Sometimes you just sit, so the tired thing in front of you knows it isn't facing the dark alone. That was always the whole trick. Nobody ever wrote it down because it was never complicated enough to need writing.